CEMO is hosting its 5th annual Symposium on Wednesday and Thursday. The event brings together a cross-section of partners, including emergency first responders. The focus of the conference is on fire management, preparation, and public awareness.
The idea is that when we talk about emergency management, a main aspect of it is actually capacity building and sharing information, using best practices, and really having a forum where first responders and emergency management practitioners and also policymakers and elected officials can convene together and to, over 2 days, share strategies. As well, we're going to be looking at the legislative framework in terms of fire prevention. We're going to look at fires in homes, fires in offices. We're going to look at prevention strategies. We're going to look even at policy. One of the things that I mentioned is you don't think about prevention just from even the home situation, but when we look at building codes and things like that, that's a major risk within our society.
With a spate of fires across the municipalities in recent months, a key part of the discussion on this pressing emergency risk is the readiness of first responders, which means the skills and also the proper equipment needed to respond to an emergency.
The work of the fire service is an ongoing process. It's unending process. It continues round and round. We must continue to train at all times. We must continue to train, we must continue to equip the fire service. Though those goes hand in hand. Now when we talk about equipment, we're talking about protective clothing, self-contained breathing apparatus, branch pipes, vehicles, things of that nature, rescue equipment, yes.
We, the elected officials, must ensure that there is adequate budgetary support to ensure that the equipment is up to date. Even in my presentation, I mentioned something as important but oftentimes overlooked to ensure that the fire service officers are appropriately remunerated. You expect people to go into a fire and to risk their lives, but they have to be paid appropriately.
Mayor, just recently in the reading of the national budget, we heard that their budget was cut for the fire department. Share with us your thoughts, especially considering the city, and we have had so many fires across the city.
Well, I think I would always put a plug in for emergency management. As a city grows, as we see expansion in terms of population, building, and so forth, there's always increased risk that you may have an emergency. So that those areas I would think are emergency priority areas that should be expanded. One of the things I will say, though, is that we can be creative in relation to how we source equipment. The municipalities throughout Belize, I know San Ignacio, San Pedro, Belmopan, even Orange Walk have been very active in developing sister city relationships. And one of the things or ways that we get equipment is through these sister city associations. So it's not necessarily the budget that will have a response, but you can have more creative ways to source equipment.
For the first time, CEMO's Symposium is hosting international speakers to talk about maritime fire prevention and response. It is not often discussed in the wider conversation of fires, but as one of the experts notes, it is important considering that there is a growing number of vessels operating within Belize's maritime spaces, such as cruise ships, barges, and commercial boats.
Evolution of fire on board a ship is different from evolution on fire on land. For example, in your house, it may happen a lot faster. On board ships, a lot of the materials are fire-resistant materials. However, when a fire starts on board a ship, even with effective management of the fire, it can burn for days. So the way it is handled is totally different because you're dealing with a fire in a steel box, which is much hotter than fire within a tall burning building. And it's also different in the way you fight it. For example, on board a ship, you look to kill the fire, starve the fire of oxygen by closing all accesses to it. You can't do that with a structural fire because you have to go inside a structural fire to do, you're dealing with the normal lives. You have to open it up to go in to get people out and fight a fire. So it's contrasting way to do to obtain the same means. I know the firefighting department understand the differences, but I'd like for the politicians and the people who provide the means for the firefighters to understand. I know it's additional resources and it's a cost, and it's always a difficult thing for governments, even in developed countries, to provide additional fundings. But it is a necessary means. We have cruise ships coming here, and it's even more Critical here because your major vessels, they are at sea. They stay 5 miles out. They don't come to the dock, where it would be easier for firefighters to board the vessel to fight a fire.
The symposium continues on Thursday with a live simulation by the fire department. Reporting for News 5, I'm Andrea Polanco.